Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the latest on the Rwanda Bill as amendments are prepared by various groups ahead of the second reading vote next Tuesday. There are threats that the bill will be defeated by rebels if Sunak doesn't back them, but are they serious and do they have the numbers? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So now that Parliament has returned from the Christmas recess, Rishi Sunak is having to slip back into the groove of dodging parliamentary shenanigans. Yesterday, Labour presented two opposition day motions, one commenting on the plight of NHS dentistry in England, noting that funding had fallen in real terms and calling for serious action. The second was to call to demand that the government publish the accounts on the Rwanda plan so far. Both were defeated by the Conservatives. Labour can now say that the Tories oppose moves to improve NHS dentistry, which is a bigger deal than you may think, and also that the Tories voted to conceal the full cost of the Rwanda plan from the public. Now, a tricky issue at the best of time, but when even Rishi Sunak has had to admit that he had reservations about the costs as Chancellor, this vote to maintain opacity is an even bigger stick for Labour to beat the Tories with. Basically, Tory MPs have decided that it's less damaging to be seen to conceal the costs of the plan than it is to reveal the costs. And bear in mind, the costs as known so far are already eye-watering. So that suggests that the actual costs may be far higher than reported. Or maybe it's not that the costs are far higher than reported, but they fear the public finding out exactly where that money's gone. Because it's all right saying, oh yeah, we've given them 240 million, another 50 million this year. It's like, okay, but who's them exactly? Where's the money gone? Conflicts of interest for ministers will be a hot issue in election year. So much so that I see Sunak's wife has donated shares from the childcare company she had an interest in, which benefited from last year's budget, and Sunak did not declare. There's a fear of just how many votes the Tory sleaze mountain might cost them. But the most immediate problem for Sunak right now is the second reading of the Rwanda Bill. At the first reading, the far-right groups, the ERG and the New Conservatives, urged Tory MPs to at least make the vote close. Danny Kruger of the New Conservatives wanted the bill sinking at the first hurdle. But if they could have at least arranged for a large-scale abstention so that the bill only just passed the first reading, that would have sent a message to Sunak that he would be defeated unless he looks at amendments seriously. In the event, Sunak won the vote easily. Now, it's not clear whether this is because there is no sizable rebellion or whether Tory MPs are prepared to defeat the bill, but they want to give amendments a serious chance. They're willing to give Sunak the chance to consider their amendments to alleviate their concerns. Their concerns being, remember, that the government could be bound by human rights laws. Many of them want to see those human rights laws abolished altogether, but if that's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen this Parliament, at least ensure that the government isn't bound by those laws. They want the government to be above the law. Those amendments are being presented today, putting possible rebellions to one side for a moment. Let's consider the various possible outcomes. So the first is that Sunak is not prepared to support a bill which would have his government completely ignoring the cause. The second is that Sunak accepts amendments which might risk the government being able to ignore court rulings, assuming moderate Tories don't defeat that amendment. So then the House of Lords is likely to amend the bill themselves to remove those elements. The Lords don't have to block the bill outright. They could, but they probably won't. They'll probably just keep removing clauses which circumvent our laws. Sunak will probably have a pop at unelected Labour peers, but I can't see this being a political winner for him, given how clearly Starmer has been opposed to the Rwanda plan in all its misplaced glory. You know, given that Starmer, let's be fair, is rarely clear to the nth degree about most policies, but this is one in which he is. So that must mean Labour are convinced it's not a vote loser for them. The issue here is Labour are concerned about one group. Usually we're used to the Conservatives and Labour fighting over the same groups of voters, the swing voters. But it's like Labour are looking at those swing voters and the Tories are chasing after the Reform UK voters. So they're both appealing to very different voters. The third possibility is that some form of bill, which all sides can feel can be passed into law, is passed into law, the bill is now law in whatever form, and then Sunak has to put it to the test? As far as I can tell, he can't. In fact, the worst case scenario for Sunak seems to be that the bill passes into law, because it will then be exposed as utterly useless, just like all the others. There was a report a while ago that no commercial airlines will touch the contract with a barge pole for fear of the PR disaster contained within. So that would mean getting the Ministry of Defence to organise it. Only they don't want to touch it with a barge pole either. In their case, they don't have an airfield with the security needed to manage protests, and the government haven't stumped up the funds needed to prepare that security. That alone tells us that Sunak does not expect his bill to become law anytime soon, if ever. He hasn't even arranged for any planes to action his scheme. In my opinion, Sunak wants his bill to be passed by the House of Commons, and he wants it to be held up or blocked by the House of Lords. In theory, accepting amendments from rebel groups on the far right could help him there, because they can then deflect all the blame to unelected Labour and Lib Dem peers. In practice, conceding to clearly insane amendments might result in worse consequences elsewhere. But what I'd be interested in knowing is this, and I may not get an answer anytime soon, if ever. So Sunak has suggested that the flights will take off within days of the bill becoming law, and that he expects a significant reduction in channel crossings again within days of that. The second suggestion is completely off the chart. It would have no impact on channel crossings. But even the first seems unlikely, given that he hasn't got the logistics in place. According to Sunak, this bill is going to pass into law very quickly. The government are really ramming it through Parliament. So you would expect, if it is going to pass into law as Sunak suggests, it's going to be in place by the spring. That's the implication. So why hasn't he arranged for planes and a secure airfield then? So if we work on the assumption that Sunak does not intend this bill to become law, my question would be, why doesn't he go along with the clauses proposed by the far right of his party then? After all, the reason he didn't drop the entire scheme like a hot potato was to appease them. And there are three possible answers to this. First, that he doesn't think there is a credible risk of the far right rebelling against him in sufficient numbers, so he doesn't have to play along, or at least not to that extent. Second, that he believes that if he appeases the far right to this extent, and he's prepared to do it, then the centre-right within his party will rebel and sink the bill anyway, because there's as many of them as there are on the far right. Third, that he fears external consequences. Because bear in mind, win or lose the next election, Sunak needs to cope with the international consequences of this act. If he wins the election, he continues as Prime Minister, but loses even more status on the world stage as he is shunned for his efforts to undermine the rule of law. If he loses the election, or later on when he decides he wants a career after being Prime Minister, he has to have his eye on some role. He's not just going to sit at home watching Netflix, is he? He must have in mind something he's going to do as part of his post-Prime Ministerial career. And that could be soured by that same role in undermining the rule of law so blatantly, if that's what he becomes known for. So it may well be that Sunak will risk a rebellion rather than risk having his post-political career destroyed, given that his political career right now is probably only going to last a few months. Now, it is possible that all three of those answers are true. They're not mutually exclusive. But one of them must surely have played into his thinking when he argued against some of the ideas coming from the ERG and similar groups. So I think expect a lot of debates to spill out into the Tory media, because various groups want to try and demonstrate public support for their fruitcake of an amendment. They know they're not going to win over Sunak with arguments because they've already tried that, right? So they need to show, oh, this is actually publicly popular. So how do you demonstrate that? Well, you need it to be presented in the news. You need people to read it. Then you need a pollster to gauge public reaction. Then next Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll see where Sunak is. If he fails to support any of the really controversial amendments, he might allow a token one in. But if he fails to support any of the major changes, but still sees the second reading pass comfortably, then that's probably it. It's difficult to see how rebellion is feasible before the election. If he fails to support those amendments and sees the bill just squeak through, That would suggest there's a risk of it failing at the third reading. So there'll be a lot of jostling. The party leadership will seek to persuade rebel Tories not to go over the brink as an election's looming. Rebel groups will seek to say, yeah, there's an election looming and we're going to lose it really badly. This is our only chance to trigger a change that will resurrect our fortunes. But I would suggest, in reality, the longer rebels leave it to defeat the bill, the less time they have to force that change of direction from Sunak or to force the change of leadership with a credible amount of time before the election. In fact, you would think that if the bill is passed next week by whatever margin, that's surely probably it for the rebellion. They'll be all bark and no bite. The third possibility, of course, is that the bill is just defeated next week. That would be crisis time for the Conservatives and for Sunak. See, it's one thing to have it defeated in the Lords. You just stick it in the manifesto, you blame Labour, stick it in the manifesto for the election, and then that's that. You know, when it's defeated by your own MPs, like, how do you resolve that? You can't resolve that with the manifesto because people just say, but you're the party that's divided over this. So Johnson resolved that problem, that parallel problem in 2019 over Brexit, by booting out the Brexit rebels, right? Sunak hasn't got the bottle to do that with the main rebels over this policy. So what does he do? He can't just stick it in the manifesto because people will say, but your party is the one that's divided over this. But also, what do the Conservatives in general do? And that's why I think the rebellion is ultimately not going to materialise. Any Conservative MP looking at the Rwanda plan right now, critically, no matter what their own personal political beliefs are, they must know it's not happening in this Parliament. They will know that letting the Lords defeat the government is better than trashing it themselves. But of course, that is based on most Tory MPs having some awareness of what's going on. The first signs, I think, will be later this week, maybe the weekend, when we start to see the reaction of various MPs to the inevitable articles in the Tory client media. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.